A 11-year-old girl child, resident of Coimbatore city, presented with chief complaints of high-grade intermittent fever for 20 days, passing yellow-colored urine for 17 days, and history of oral ulcers for 1 week. Coming to history of present illness, she was validated 20 days ago when it was started with high fever, but there was no nausea, vomiting. Her urine has become progressively darker, and she has persisting upper abdominal pain from day 5. From day 8, she appeared tired and was nauseated. On day 14, mild abdominal distension was noted, but there was no history of pale-colored stools, no history of itching or bleeding. The referring doctor noticed icterus 3 days earlier to admission. For 48 hours prior to admission, she was excessively sleepy, but there was no past history of jaundice or any blood transfusion, and she was not been on any anti-tubercular, anti-convulsant drugs in recent past. She was adequately immunized, except hepatitis A vaccine was not given, and she was developmentally normal child with no family history of similar illness.
Yeah, so here's, go back to your slide. Yeah, this is a 11-year-old girl. Yeah, previous one. 11-year-old girl with fever for 20 days and jaundice, which manifested initially as high-colored urine, and subsequently by third week, she is obviously icteric. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, and she's become excessively sleepy, which obviously means to us that the liver is probably not functioning too well by then. So any thoughts from the audience on what could be the possible etiology in our setup? Anybody? No, you're not. You can think. You can think but not talk. Yeah, anybody from the audience? Please talk. I think. Yeah, go ahead. Anything that anybody wants to make a diagnosis of acute viral hepatitis, or nobody wants? It's an acute liver injury. Okay. And possible etiology?
Patient toxic or not? Whether the patient is toxic?
Patient is toxic by day 20 when she came to hospital. She is sick. Yes? Anybody? Right. Anything from the panel, sir? Acute liver failure or acute severe liver disease by third week with a persisting fever. I think here our problem is that the fever has never come down. Normally in an acute viral hepatitis, you would expect the fever to have gone away. So unless it's become a complicated acute viral hepatitis, an ordinary viral hepatitis is out of question. Anything
somebody, a child, 2 weeks, 3 weeks history of high-grade fever, not coming down, looking toxic. I think we have to look at common things first, like even like enteric fever, which is quite common.
Yeah.
They can be toxic and have things. And then comes rarer things, viral, malignancy, those sort of things comes down.
Right, so common things first.
Common.
And we would still go after an infection as the first possibility. Because there's persisting fever, we will think of an infection. May not be the classical acute viral hepatitis, something, yeah? No prodrome. No prodrome. Yes? Any other thoughts, sir? I think you want to add on something? Yeah, please.
So, I mean, this is just for the students among us. When we teach, we say hepatitis can be due to, and just for us to remember, A, B, C, D, E. I'm not saying failure. So that the students remember, hepatitis is due to A, B, C, D, E, EBV, CMV, and HSV. So that we don't forget. Typhoid in a child like that. And just for us to remember, I have these little things so that I don't forget. MLD, we know as metachromatic leukodystrophy, but MLD stands for malaria, leptospirosis, and dengue. So that we don't forget the whole gamut of things. Am I right, sir?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And one more question.
And adenovirus, I mean, you want to throw in adenovirus because you're doing transplants now. In those who have transplants, you'll have adeno. But otherwise, no. Otherwise, this is how I would say it will be among one of these unlikely to be virus. And unless you give me the SGPT and the other hepatic enzymes, I'm not going to comment further. But I'll keep MLD in mind apart from typhoid. Right, sir? Thank you.
That's very crucial. Lepto can go on like this for days and on end. I wanted to know what kind of antipyretics was she receiving during this time for the 20 days that she had high fever?
For the fever, I think she was only on paracetamol.
She was
Nothing
on
much, and nothing to suggest a paracetamol overdose.
As a hepatologist, I'm asking
No, no.
This is a reverse asking.
No.
Would you worry if a patient of this kind is continuously given antipyretics? I mean, I don't know, the dose might not be correct and...
Oh, it can. I think we don't see paracetamol poisoning that commonly as a report in the West. Partly because I think most pediatricians tend to use 10 to 15 milligram per kilogram. And then the parents will give 5 to 10 milligram per kilogram. So in the end, I think you don't treat the fever and you don't manage the liver as well.
May I make a comment here
Yeah.
again? So may I make a comment?
Yeah.
So we need to remember as pediatricians that you get crocin, calpol, paracetamol in 2 forms. You get them in drops. And this is where we see the paracetamol toxicity, which is 5 times as concentrated as the syrup. The syrup is 100 or 120 milligrams. The drops are 100 milligram per 1 ml. I know patients where we have said use the syrup and they've given the drops, so the dose becomes really 4 to 5 times. And if you see 80 milligram per kilogram with the upper dose, you are given something like 300 milligram per kilogram. Just
Yeah,
to
I
say
think
what-
it's a point well to be received. And I think recently, maybe about 6 months ago, one company in South India had introduced a paracetamol syrup of 500 milligram per 5 ml. And I couldn't figure out how a 500 milligram requiring child could manage it.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Can you take a mic, sir? And
Reports
identify
of,
yourself if you may.
Yeah, Dr. Thapa from Chandigarh.
We know
yeah,
you.
The paracetamol per se, once it is given with the curiosity to bring down the temperature, it can exceed the dose of 90 milligram per kg body
Sure.
weight, which is called supratherapeutic dose. And with supratherapeutic dose, you can have
Oh, yes.
hepatotoxicity.
Yeah, well
it's
said.
well known. Even if there is underlying viral hepatitis over and above paracetamol coming in, this will be a problem. This happens, and of course the formulation which
Mistake.
you have in the market.
So,
that's
so
also
we'll
very-
keep this in mind to say that one, this could be a primary liver disease from one of the organisms that he said, or that the child's got fever from one reason and the drug or whatever the treatment or the liver injury is iatrogenic. Yes, I think we should look at that as well. Yeah, go ahead.
On examination, anthropometry, weight corresponds to 50th centile. Height projects between 25th to 50th centile on CDC growth chart. On general examination, she was febrile, looks toxic, dehydrated, found to be icteric. There were enlarged cervical lymph nodes, the largest measuring 1.5 centimeter on both sides. But there was no pallor, no cyanosis, no clubbing, no pedal edema. There were painful ulcers on lips and tongue. Her vitals found to be stable. Systemic examination, per abdomen was soft, liver 4 centimeters palpable below right costal margin, liver span found to be 10 centimeters, spleen was just palpable, there was no free fluid, other systems were normal.
Was it tender?
Liver was tender, yes.
Tender.
Liver was tender. Yeah. Next.
And here's a picture which shows,
Can we just put out these slides? I think. Hi, Anupam. Yeah. Yeah.
HSV. How about that, sir?
Yep.
Why not collagen vascular disease?
Collagen. Yes, next slide. I think go ahead.
and this is the clinical summary. 11-year-old girl child presented with high-grade fever for 20 days and jaundice for 3 days. On examination, she was conscious but sleepy. She was febrile, icteric, with painful ulcers, front of mouth, and with soft hepatosplenomegaly. These are the clinical possibilities which we considered: leptospirosis, typhoid fever, cholangitis, autoimmune hepatitis.
Is that acceptable? I think we went the same path as you did. We also saw these oral ulcers and thought of HSV. But she is an immunocompetent child, so we did not think that the HSV could be the primary reason for the liver disease.
Why should you think of cholangitis in a child who's sleeping and showing almost signs of itchy?
That basically, I think, came from an ultrasound report from outside which had suggested some biliary sludge.
Report bias.
But we're still on the clinical summary.
Yeah,
and
no,
when you
no,
talk
no.
of
I mean,
summary,
basically, no. This is a diagnosis that he has put from the file from there. I think this is just as it has happened. He has been very honest and truthful. yeah, Venkatesh. 20 days of fever, girl, adolescent.
But such a high-grade fever,
High-grade
toxic,
fever.
would it sort of, do you think of autoimmune?
Could be the drugs. No, we're just thinking aloud. Okay. That's why he's kept it last. Yeah.
But I don't know whether I'm biased because I'm a hem-onc person. The oncological conditions, like even a leukemia, which is smoldering,
Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
non-Hodgkin's
Lymphoma
lymphoma,
can
leukemias, these
present,
lymphoreticulae malignancies, HLH, which is another thing which we should
Yeah.
consider.
HLH is also considered. Yeah, go ahead. I think-
Based on these clinical
Actually, with your oral ulcer, what are these among these that you suggesting with your oral ulcer? I would like to know for myself.
No,
Nothing is.
Nothing much.
nothing. None of these
I
should be.
think, what about pallor? What about the
No
older
pallor.
child having pallor?
No, I think we'll come to the investigations. I think, go ahead.
Based on these clinical possibilities, we further investigate the child. Here are the clinical pathology lab parameters. Hemoglobin was low, it was 9.3, MCV 103.4 units. WBC was elevated 27,100 with lymphocyte predominance 64%. Eosinophils found to be 8%, ESR 20. Peripheral smear report shows macrocytic normochromic anemia with leukocytosis, lymphocytosis, eosinophilia, and presence of atypical lymphocytes. Reticulocyte count found to be 11%, or corrected reticulocyte is 8%. DCT done is negative.
Next.
Here are the clinical biochemistry lab parameters. Liver parameters were deranged. Serum bilirubin was elevated with total bilirubin 5.1, direct fraction 4, indirect 1.1. Transaminases were elevated with SGPT 643 and SGOT 375 units. GGT was marginally elevated. Proteins were within normal limits. PT was found to be 15.4 against the control of 13. INR was 1.24. APTT found to be 34.4 against the control of 30. And serum ammonia levels were elevated, that is 238, against the upper normal limit of 115 units. Her electrolytes, urea, creatinine were normal. Serum ceruloplasmin levels were within normal limits. Her serum ferritin levels were elevated, that is 895 units. It may attribute to its characteristic feature of acute phase reactant. However, in view of suspected HLH, that is hemophagocytosis, serum triglyceride levels were done, but they were within normal limits, hence it was ruled out.
With a normal WBC count, normal platelet, you are still thinking of HLH. I'm asking you. Is it you do still think of an HLH if you have a normal?
No, we wouldn't.
Probably would not.
Not.
Why would you do a ferritin in a child who's having no biocytopenia? Why did you do ferritin?
I think serum ferritin was done partly because of this worry about HLH.
But the indicator should be biocytopenia.
Yeah,
The audience should understand that.
No, but there are criteria. One of them is bicytopenia. So 5 of the 8 criteria. Therefore, you have to work up if you're clinically suspecting, and there's no harm in looking at the criteria. There are HLH.
Criteria. You would like to do everything in spite the absence of biocytopenia?
Yeah, because it need not have bicytopenia always. And in fact, if you look at anemia, 9.3 is anemia. So there is one cytopenia, definitely. So you can't rule that out. You would
Blood culture was sterile. Blood culture was sterile. I think you go down.
But the
Yeah.
CBC needs to be interpreted.
Yeah.
Which, I think you are waiting to do it later.
Yeah, I think.
Because I am itching to talk.
Yeah.
Waiting.
No, I think why don't when we have your comments on.
Yeah, so see, this is a macrocytic anemia, and you have atypical lymphocytes with lymphocytosis. This all goes in favor of either a leukemia sitting there, a bone marrow involvement, or a lymphoma with bone marrow involvement, or even it could be an EBV.
Absolutely.
So these would be my differentials, and I would work up in
So you'd
that
worry about the
direction
malignant-
rather than HLH. As rightly she pointed out here, CBC gives a lot of clue where you won't go in the direction of HLH.
A
You'll go in the
leukemia with a
direction.
reticulocyte count
But you
of
can have
11%.
HLH along with these, so therefore it is a little tricky.
And I think
We
now this peripheral smear was done a couple of times because each time they were not sure what they were seeing.
Okay.
Whether the atypical lymphocytes were initially thought of to be query blasts,
Right.
and then the senior person
It's
said,
difficult.
"No, when a child is sick, you go through this." Unfortunately, we can't put investigations as in order, so it's been clubbed together. So these have not been all done on one day.
8%.
Retic is 11, there can be hemolysis, even immune hemolysis in a leukemia, in a lymphoma, in a EBV. I mean, all three can explain.
So at this stage, we haven't still reached a diagnosis. So we're still stuck on a diagnosis. Yes, next, I think,
Yeah,
Next.
this is the ultrasound abdomen report which shows minimal periportal cuffing with gallbladder edema.
Yeah. You're supposed to only think and not talk.
I'm just asking you a question. What is it's important for the audience to know as to what is your clinical syndromic diagnosis at this point. Are you talking of just an acute hepatitis here, or is it an acute liver failure? Because we began with a program in our hand which said acute liver failure, so our mind
don't look at what is written there.
Yeah, so the syndromic diagnosis at this point should be clear in our mind.
Yeah.
Is it acute hepatitis that
It
we're
is
dealing
acute
with?
hepatitis.
Here's the ultrasound abdomen report. It was reported as probable hepatitis.
I think, just go back. One of the things that all ultrasoundologists like to do is to give us a diagnosis. And I think we should tell our sonologists also not to point to a diagnosis. And they're very fond of putting a diagnosis. I think they should put an impression on their findings. But very often we get misguided or, yeah. They should not.
They should give. They generally don't give diagnosis, but
No.
they will give you findings.
Findings.
And they tell you that clinically correlate.
Correlate.
That's it.
Yep, you're,
And I think sonologists should also refrain from saying suggest CT scan.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing, because then even when there's absolutely no need for a next investigation, it gets done when it's not
yeah.
necessary.
The worst thing is to say mesenteric lymphadenopathy, rule out tuberculosis. That's the worst you can
But
get.
let's
So,
be fair to them. They are also doctors in their own standing, and they want to just suggest to the clinician for helping sake. So if we take it in that manner, it doesn't matter. If they're suggesting, you decide whether you feel like doing it or you don't feel like
yeah, no, I think what happens always is, I don't know how much you feel it here. Down south, the problem is the patient reads these reports. If only we could, if only we could seal the reports and give it to us. That's a communication between one doctor to another doctor. Then I think we would
That's fair
would
enough.
be.
If that was the point Abba was making,
Yeah.
I agree. Patient should not know what he has suggested.
Yeah, that's correct.
Because he'll do it before even he lands up with you when it was not required.
We have reports
Dr. Marchan, you want to add anything to?
No, I think you should not talk about sonologists when there's no one here to defend themselves. It's not fair. It's completely unfair. There's no sonologist here, and there should be a sonologist to say something. Otherwise, we should not
Yeah.
put a finger on the sonologist.
So this ultrasound shows minimal periportal cuffing with a gallbladder wall edema, and all suggestive of an acute severe hepatitis. Nothing much. Yeah. Next slide.
Serology, all viral hepatitis markers were negative. HBs, AG, anti-HIV IgM negative. Anti-leptospira, EBV serology, ANA profile was negative. Liver autoimmune profile was done, it was negative. Vidal was done, but the titers are not suggestive of enteric fever.
This all been done serially. Yeah?
One question, what EBV serology did you send? What exactly you sent? Did you send
The entire thing.
early antigen as
Everything,
well as
all together, all five, all
Also
four,
BCA, IG.
everything was negative. Because of those atypical lymphocytes is where, because of that atypical lymphocytes. Yes, anybody wants to think aloud now?
Also, one more thing. Should we have sent a parvovirus in this case?
Parvo generally can fit in with this scenario, but doesn't cause atypical lymphocytes.
But you'll get pancytopenia.
Pancytopenia,
You get a pancytopenia.
anemia, it can have only
We don't have
anemia
anything.
also,
You
with
actually have a
hepatitis.
very high platelet count,
But
4 lakhs.
atypical lymphocytes is little out of place for parvo. Parvo typically doesn't cause atypical lymphocytes.
Parvovirus.
We know that pancytopenia is possibly the commonest presentation. Is there anything else apart from
No, you can have immune hemolysis. Parvo is not all aplastic anemia or pancytopenia. You can have immune hemolysis. You can have just simply mild anemia with a mild reticulocytopenia in a healthy person. In an immune deficient, it will be much different. In a hemolytic anemia setting, it will be different. So parvo still could be on the lower down on the list, but not very likely.
Naresh, you want to comment anything?
Just I want to summarize what's been having. Looking at the picture, the INR is normal. So it's an acute hepatitis picture. And then the ultrasound, what we need to look at when somebody is presenting, whether there is a coarse liver and a big spleen, which tells us like a chronic disease. On top somebody has a thing. So when we look at an ultrasound for somebody with a liver disease, we have to mainly look into whether there is coarseness is commented and a splenomegaly. In this case, which is negative. So it is an ongoing acute hepatitis. And looking at the inflammatory markers, there is not much elevated inflammatory markers. So we are trying to rule out any bacterial cause as the problem for the fever. Now we have left out with viral, autoimmune, and probably a malignancy, which is high on our list now.
Right, so it's we're not endemic for malaria in that region, so I think.
It's a question to you, sir. Though there is no significant thrombocytopenia, would you consider scrub as an etiology? Scrub.
I think scrub typhus, what I have seen, and what we do have some scrub typhus, they have some liver dysfunction, but they don't have very severe, very severe liver dysfunction. This seems to be an acute severe hepatitis which is progressing, and subsequently when we've repeated the liver parameters, it has worsened over the course of 3 or 4 days.
From clinical point of view, child is having fever for 20 days, almost 18 days, then developing jaundice. In hepatitis, you would have expected jaundice and
Then,
probably fever, then jaundice and jaundice.
no, this is the
increasing.
jaundice is being picked up on day 7, even though the urine was high colored from day 5.
Then you said only 5 days before the admission.
No, that's the jaundice. Jaundice is picked up from day 5, the high colored urine is from day 5.
Now come
Go
to
ahead,
the
go
conclusion.
ahead, next one.
We are curious.
You have to spend another 20.
Other
Are you still
investigations.
calling for malaria, sir? Are you still
No,
betting
malaria,
for
he
malaria?
said it is malaria-free zone. In north, would have thought of malaria, still thought of malaria.
You would have thought of malaria. Anyway, the peripheral smear would have picked it up also. Yes, Manto
Other
is negative.
investigations, Manto negative, chest X-ray showed mild right pleural effusion. Blood culture was sterile.
Yes, go ahead. I think they're all curious. Yep.
During hospital stay, she was started on IV antibiotic in view of high-grade fever with leukocytosis. On day 4 of hospital stay, she developed maculopapular non-itchy rash. It was initially developed over face and trunk. Later, it involved the whole body.
She was on ceftriaxone. Ciprofloxacin.
Ciprofloxacin.
Huh? Next slide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is anybody with anything now? Can we put this together? There's a liver dysfunction, there's a skin rash. Huh? What?
Drugs, drug-induced.
Systemic onset JRA, yes. She's also got some ulcers on the lips.
Dress.
Viral.
At
Next
this
slide.
instance, considering the possibility of cutaneous manifestation in association with diagnosis, and as a part of complete workup, skin biopsy was done. This was a clinical scenario, fever with jaundice and rash.
This is what happens when you don't know what to do, you go back and take a history. Right? And the history was retaken from the
History
mother.
was retaken from the mother. Mother has given history that child had a hypopigmented patch on her cheeks, for which they consulted local dermatologist. He had given topical cream and a tablet 10 days prior to the onset of fever. She had stopped the oral drug 1 week after the fever was started, and it was the drug which was prescribed.
Dapsone. So what's any diagnosis now? Dress syndrome. Dress syndrome. Next slide.
In the meanwhile, skin biopsy was reported. It showed, epidermis showed apoptotic keratosis, superficial dermis showed pigment incontinence, perivascular lymphocytic infiltrate with eosinophils, and the diagnosis consistent with drug-induced dermatitis. Hereby, we finally arrived at the diagnosis, Druss syndrome, drug reaction with eosinophilia and systemic symptoms. Here are the features which favor the diagnosis of Druss syndrome: prolonged fever, skin rash, lymphadenopathy, liver involvement, blood picture showing eosinophilia and atypical lymphocytes, and the skin biopsy features consistent with drug-induced dermatitis. She was started on IV steroids on day 5 and then switched on to oral steroids on day 7. She was improved, fever subsided by day 7. Repeat LFT and CBC was improved. She was discharged on day 9 of hospital stay and called for follow-up. On review,
Yeah, it's okay. I think everything is
both
improved
LFT and
and
CBC improved, and
dramatic improvement. Yes, next slide. Just put up the, yeah, tell us.
yeah, let's see in short about the Druss syndrome. It's a severe adverse drug-induced reaction. Incidence about 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000 of drug exposures. Though 50 drugs has been advocated to induce Druss, main culprit drugs are carbamazepine and allopurinol. It can be associated with human herpes virus 4, 6, and 7. Hence, reactivation of this virus has to be considered. Mortality of Druss syndrome.
This is what those oral ulcers we were finding, sir, was raising up the possibility of the herpes on the, it's a part of reactivation that occurs with Druss syndrome. And that's, you know, when you look back, actually this child had everything. The first slide will tell you there was a lymphadenopathy. There was a lymphadenopathy. There was eosinophilia. There was literally everything. All that we got in the reverse order was the skin rash came later.
Where was the mother in between? She was not with the child.
He was there. Nobody took a history.
What she was asking repeatedly, drug history. She hinted even at paracetamol.
But something
drug
else.
history is very important.
Extremely important.
Not only this, but Baba Ramdev's medication also has to be known.
Yep, go ahead.
Mortality is estimated to be around 10%. Here are the clinical features. It usually starts 2 to 8 weeks of drug intake. Clinical features includes fever, rash, lymphadenopathy, hematological findings like eosinophilia, leukocytosis, cutaneous features, arterial rash, maculopapular eruption, vesicles, bullae, pustules can be seen. Visual involvement, it may involve hepatitis, pneumonitis, myocarditis, pericarditis, nephritis, etc. Currently, there are 2 diagnostic criteria in practice. One is Registrar diagnosis and another is Japanese diagnosis. And this is Registrar diagnosis score for DRUS. It includes features of fever, enlarged lymph nodes, atypical lymphocytes, eosinophils, skin rash and skin biopsy, internal organ involvement and resolution in more than 15 days. As per this diagnostic score, if the final score is less than 2, it's not a case of DRUS. If it is 2 to 3, it's a possible case of DRUS syndrome. If the score is 4 to 5, it's a probable case of DRUS. If it is greater than 5, it's a definite case of DRUS syndrome. And here is another diagnostic criteria. It's a Japanese diagnostic criteria for DRUS. It has 9 clinical features. If it meets, in order to meet the diagnostic criteria for DRUS as per Japanese criteria, 7 out of 9 or first 5 is required to make diagnosis of DRUS syndrome. Thank you.
Full form.
Drug reaction with eosinophilia and systemic symptoms.
Now, I think the odd thing here was that most cases the skin rash comes first and then is the liver. But this is not the first instance, this is at least the third instance that we've had where the liver comes first and then the skin. So what the books will tell you is visceral involvement along with the skin, and most of the time it goes to a dermatologist who picks it up and asks you. Here I think it was just the reverse, that we got it and then we got the dermatologist. Say one, take a good history. A good history. And when you don't know what to do, retake a history. And when you still don't know what to do, retake that retaken history. And I think that will give you the clue.
Sir, can I make a comment? When you're talking about, when you're talking about drugs, I think drugs causing hepatitis, I'm not calling up the fever, because we talk about paracetamol first, and we say the ACTs, anticonvulsant, ATT, antitubercular, antiretroviral therapy. Yeah. Just to say that in the days when I was growing up and doing pediatrics, we, of course not this, but just because it's a matter of a drug, we saw a lot of aspirin-induced Reye's syndrome. Yeah. For some reason, Reye's syndrome or Ray's syndrome is out of the market. I mean, whether it's aspirin, which has, we stopped using as pediatricians. But the amount of Ray's syndrome that I saw while I was a resident and 40 years ago or even more was unbelievable. And the amount of deaths that we saw with Ray's syndrome. So when you're looking at drugs, we still would like to remind the audience, aspirin is a no-no as far as possible, unless you have a specific indication in pediatrics. Paracetamol or acetaminophen, and I think we should be careful about acetaminophen, about the dosage, because we tend to have syrups and drops. And that we should also know that when you suspect acetaminophen, you have an immediate therapy for it with N-acetylcysteine. And I think we should know this on the tip of our fingers, how to give it. And the other drugs which are there.
Thank you very much.
You have time. You have plenty of time. No?